right, we're excited to get started for another week of conversation with accessibility leaders. Wally has launched a podcast to join a weekly conversation with leaders and community evangelists about the challenges of navigating an effective accessibility strategy. Each week, guests join to talk about their journey in successes and setbacks, primarily with a focus on how they've overcome these obstacles and how it can affect everyone who decides to listen. So, my name is Brian Gavin. I'm the co-founder of Wally. I'm delighted today to be joined by Roman Guerrero, and really excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Brian. I'm excited to be here. It's been a good conversations we've had in the past, and I'm looking forward to getting to expand on that here.
Yeah, we've had some great conversations that didn't make it to air. So today we'll be sure to uh, make it the best one yet. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I'd love for you to share with the audience a little bit about your background, what
Yeah,
you work on in the accessibility space, and anything else you want to share.
yeah. So a few bits about me. You're probably wondering why I'm here in the accessibility space. It's because I'm in a wheelchair. So I'm 25 now. 5 years ago, I was riding a motorcycle and I crashed it. And when I fell off my bike, I slammed into a parked car and I broke my back at the T2, T3 level all the way down to T8. And so now what that means is I'm paralyzed from right about here down. And the trajectory that has changed my life for obvious reasons is apparent, but the ones that are less apparent have had a very strong effect on the course of my life and the direction of the routes I take. So now it took a few years, I will be honest. The first 3 years after that, I spent a life where I didn't hear no very often because I was a young guy who just got hurt and I very much got away with whatever I wanted. And so what that did for me was put me on a track to go nowhere, because unless you start hearing no and meet opposition, you're going to find that you can make your way through life and learn absolutely nothing. So the 2 years that followed after that, more apparently the last year, have been very challenging years that I have brought onto myself while trying to educate others on accessibility and learn more about it myself. Because what I found was that I was a huge vacuum of knowledge in this space. Before these very changing times in my life, I had no idea what accessibility meant. I didn't know about wheelchairs and all of these things, about people having different needs and hearing disabilities and all the rest of it. So it was very new to me. I was very ignorant in this world, not because I didn't care, but because it didn't come across my table. So now that I'm here in this position, what I've learned is that I've put myself in positions to help guide others, to help educate others, and to help consult others to be more educated in this space as well. So right now, I do a handful of things in this space. I do modeling for accessibility. So, being someone who's part of many minority groups, it allows me to go and be part of these modeling sessions and stuff like that. And I work with Lululemon. I work with their Paralympic design team, and I'm in charge of being the fit model and the product tester of all the new iterations we're making. So, to get to the final piece of clothing, there's 5 iterations that we go through with pins hanging through everything, and I go with them through that and help figure that out and test it out in different spaces. And I do public speaking as well. So I do motivational speaking for fitness events, and I do educational speaking for schools, elementary schools, and universities. And I get to go in there, talk to the students, challenge them, educate them, and the teachers as well. It's something that I've learned. It's very when it's in your bubble, it always makes sense to you, and it's hard to conceptualize the fact that people outside of your bubble don't know what you're talking about or what you're going through, even though at a glance it might seem obvious. So getting to help educate all these kids and all these parents and all these teachers and all these older students about how life works in a wheelchair and what we can do and our limitations and how to communicate and have conversations has been a huge part of my life in the most recent 5 6 months, and something that I've really enjoyed doing and I will continue to pursue doing, because the amount of value that I find in there and the purpose I find within myself doing that has turned out to be very, very gratuitous and something that I've learned to really enjoy. So it's not really a summary of what I do; it's very much an explanation. But I hope that answers a little bit about who I am.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. You kind of spoke about after your accident having to get educated on this space. That's something that I hope today's conversation will do for others. But um, it's interesting, and it resonates with me because a lot of folks, from when it comes to accessibility, there isn't a ton of education, and I think the standards for schools or communities and businesses, most importantly, don't really have an equal partner to look to. So how did you break down that education? What were some helpful resources that you used to get immersed, not by choice, but by life's journey?
Yeah. So before I get into that, I want to say to everybody listening, if you're a business owner, if you're an employee, if you're a teacher, doesn't matter where you are, I go to the hospital pretty regularly because of injuries or whatever else to do with my disability, especially during the first 3 years. And what I learned was they don't know what's going on with disability. The nurses have no idea. Half the doctors don't know. So if you feel guilty for not knowing or knowing how to approach these conversations, just know that people who spent their life studying doctors and medicine and all these things, they don't even know. So never feel guilty for not knowing something because the people who should very often don't. So approach everything with an open mind and a conversation, and that'll get you very, very far. But to answer your question, what how I learned about this was it was a lot of experience, a lot of conversation with people who were leaders in the community, people who were aged in the community. I had some very good mentors at a certain point as well. I still have two of them that I respect, and they are very educated. One in terms of wheelchairs, he makes them. He was on the BC Canada and the Canada team for basketball, and he's very educated in that sense. And I have another older gentleman who's been a mentor as well, named John, and John is one of the development leaders in Praxis, something like that. They work with disability here in
Hmm.
Vancouver, and he has been instrumental into me learning how to be me again, learning how to be proud of who I am and not look at myself as someone in a wheelchair, but just as someone. So though they have been very, very powerful in terms of reading and education. I didn't spend much time doing that because I kind of learned it as I went, and that was something that I'm very grateful for because it's brought a lot of value for me and my ability to communicate and educate on what this means to live with and what it means to deal with in terms of if you're a business or with a person and you want to figure out how to have conversations based around this. So it really was a very much go get your hands dirty and learn as you go situation. That's how most
Yeah.
of my things have gone in life, and this was no different. So it was definitely one of those things. But there's good education out there. But I would say talk to somebody, and it'll teach you everything
Yeah,
you.
that conversation piece I think is so important, and it's a good segue to talk about the brands that you've worked with, that you've had exposure to from a professional setting. I'm curious some of the challenges you've seen on trying to implement and scaling an accessibility strategy.
So implementing and scaling is definitely an end goal, but not where most people start. Especially when
Hmm.
you're getting into a business. First of all, it's mainly visibility. You're coming in from a place of they want to feel, make sure people feel seen. So they'll get you in there and you'll have communications with them and you'll conversate. And the ability to help scale the brand or company in that direction comes down to me as an individual being interesting, respectful, open, vulnerable, and not so much from the door that first gets me in to their
Hmm.
company. So when I go there, it's to model, it's to do this, it's to do that, it's to help with little things here and there. But what I quickly have found is even in my apartment building where I used to live, I became a disability coordinator and someone who was in charge of checking the apartment buildings that were nearby for consultations to make sure they were accessible. Does this building have power open? Does this building have a sensor open? Does this building have easy open doors to the garbage room? And consulting in those types of projects helped me bring awareness to the people that I was working around and towards and to other people in the community, because there was people with disabilities who lived in those buildings but they didn't have the voice like I did. So being able to help move brands in the right direction comes a lot from, at least my personal experience, it comes a lot from my ability to put my foot forward and be able to communicate these things in a way that resonates with people who are titans in the industry, whether that's owning apartment buildings or contractors or developers, yeah. And then going from there to teachers in universities, teachers in high schools, elementary schools. There's a lot of people who want to learn, but they just don't know how. So
Mm.
figuring out that in and being someone who's personable and charming helps build that bridge. And then when you're there, beautiful things happen.
What's it like getting immersed in the brand? The folks that are either in the studio with you, or tech folks that you may have spoken to, the creative folks that are in the studio, helping to drive the art direction. Is it a taboo topic? Is it a like, hey, this is something that our brand is immersed in. You had said, well, we're not going to start with scale, so um, I don't know. It kind of led me to believe that maybe there's some foundational parts of how a brand gets started, or even why they're not getting started.
The irony to that question is that it is taboo if they haven't gotten started or just are getting started. It's an
Mm,
open conversation if it's already there, of course. But if it's new and they want to figure out how to get their way in, then it's taboo. So that's
mm.
an interesting subject to try and navigate. And then that reflects on me and my ability to be vulnerable. And then once we're there, it starts to open conversations that lead to the place they want to be anyway.
Would the conversation be part of some of the bigger challenges you see brands facing, or what would be top two biggest macro challenges that you see within the brand space?
It's the top two problems would be getting the right person in the studio
Mm-hmm.
because it is something that I've seen when I go to businesses and I'm there with another person who has a disability that I don't know. If they aren't extra outgoing to let the company in, it's going to create a barrier. So you have to put yourself out there a little more than someone normally would so that the
Yeah.
person on the other side is more receptive and leans towards your direction, which is tricky because you don't want to expect more from someone to go out of their comfort zone so that the other company feels comfortable enough to have the conversations. I hope this makes sense, but what I've learned is that you have to take that first step. And once you initiate, things will happen. Conversations will flow and it'll be so much easier. But it's hard to get that right person in the door from the beginning that's going to
Mm-hmm.
overstep and overshare to make everyone feel comfortable.
I like the reference to being a consultant where you were living to help provide essentially firsthand experience about what it's like to navigate the building, being in a wheelchair. Do you find it common practice that brands are bringing in folks from the accessibility space? I know for Lululemon they've made an investment in this space to help demonstrate that their brand is applicable to everyone, or at least to a more inclusive audience. So the approach from a brand perspective, I guess, can you share a little bit of your perspective on that?
Yes, there's companies like Lulu's great at it. Tommy Hilfiger does it as well. Roots. If you go on their websites, you can find an accessibility section, and what that leads to is not an accessibility menu. It's actually an accessible amount of clothes. So it'll be pants, shirts, shoes, and things that they'll do to try and make them more accessible. So whether it's easier zippers, easier clips, using Velcro on things that didn't normally have Velcro. So there is a step in the right direction, and they must be bringing in consultants because you can only get so far if you don't have the experience.
Yeah.
But they're trying, and I think that's the big thing. And once the big companies do it, smaller companies will see the value and they will start initiating and putting that into their practice as well. So from a brand's perspective, accessibility is something that isn't as talked about now, which is ironic because it's very much more talked about now than it was 2 years ago. But I can definitely see the way that this is going and the way the tide is flowing, and it will be talked about more. And in 3, 4, 5 years, I suspect most companies will have stuff like this on their website where you can directly interact with these types of products and find
Hmm.
people who can help navigate you to them if you can't find them on the website.
It's funny. Something you said kind of made me think about. I had was recently reading that Victoria's Secret launched an adaptive bra line and apparel line, right? And I'm curious, and if you can speak to this for your exposure directly at Lululemon or Tommy Hilfiger, this commitment from a model perspective, is it part of a larger accessibility strategy that the brand is implementing, or how do the various teams come together to think about accessibility?
I feel like it starts with the model. So your primary, most companies' door to this world is the model. You get the model in there, and then you do some product on them. And then what the designers realize when they're fitting the model with these garments is, you know what, we can make this work better, or we could help them use it easier. If you're a quad and your hands don't work, you don't have the proper hand function. So getting the
Mm,
model in there is very often the first step to the next seven. from getting products that are developed now for people with disabilities, for constructing them, for designing them, for retesting them, for iterations, and then for launching. But the first step is definitely, well, in my experience, the model that's in there, and then you get to see it firsthand.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, it's at least I haven't heard of it where the design comes first. Usually the model's in there, and then they work backwards from that. It's, yeah, that's, I know it's not the
Yeah. I
best, but
mean, from a Wally perspective, typically the website framework and technology and the design system, those things come first, and then they're trying to retrofit to be
yeah.
able to provide user experience that works for folks. I'd be curious for some of those brands that are offering accessibility sections on their website, how accessible is the content?
Yeah.
And what you're speaking to is definitely very relevant to the fashion, beauty, apparel space. I guess stepping outside of um, that particular line of business, how are the community involvement that you've had at the educational level? Um, how can the folks like that take away what you're saying? And they may not be hiring a model because they may not be purchasing clothing, but getting back to breaking down those barriers. If we're not ready to talk about scaling, how do we get going on the implementation?
So what Snapchat did in the States is when they wanted to make a step in this direction, they invited speakers with disabilities to come in and host down. I think it was in San Fran. They hosted meetings and webinars to help talk about what accessibility looks like in hardware and in software. So what does the product look like when you're using it, when you're interacting it, the user interface? Is it friendly for everybody? Is everyone able to use it? Which is one of the big questions that not everyone had a clear answer to. Because if you don't understand the needs of the individuals, how are you going to know that everybody gets to use your product? And the bottom line there is that it might cost you a little bit now, but if you implement it from the beginning, it's going to be cheaper. Either way, it's going to be more efficient. And down the line, what you're going to have is more users, which just means your bottom line raises because then you have more people on there watching the ads, making money off of it. So from a perspective of the teachers or a company that wants to learn, what I would say is reach out to somebody in the community and have them come in or have a private one-on-one with them like this or on Zoom and listen to
Mm-hmm.
what they have to say and understand that most of what you're wanting to learn they have. And the trick is just to ask the right questions to get the answers out of them that will help answer what you have in the back of your mind as well. So there's a lot of questions that are taboo. I see this all the time in classrooms. The kid will raise his hand. The kid's not 8, 9. She asks a question. Teacher's like, no, 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 you can't ask that. And I think it's important that as much as there are societal norms of what we can ask people with disabilities, if we get the right people in there who are willing to answer those difficult questions, it'll be better for everybody down the line. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with being curious. And especially with adults, this is way worse because they don't even raise their hand. It's just a thought in the back of their head that never gets questioned, never gets answered. So what the beautiful thing with the kids that I love is their curiosity. They don't have filters. They're wondering what you're wondering, but they're willing to ask it. They're willing to say it, and
Yeah.
it is something that's great. So what I would say, if you're trying to learn, find that person in the community, talk to them, and hear what they have to say.
So certainly have seen personal challenges yourself, but also working with brands, working within the community. I'm just curious to have some introspective thought from your side on what are some of the challenges that you've faced, some personal setbacks um, by working within the community, or even yourself um, becoming someone who's in a wheelchair.
Yeah, so working in the community in different schools, on sets for TV shows, for commercials, with companies, with brands, is that they don't know what you need to actually get in the space. So before you get to the communication aspect, you have to be able to get in the building. And very often that's not an easy option. So I'll get there, even at work. So I'd get there and I wouldn't be able to use the space like everybody else. I wouldn't be able to get to the back, wouldn't be able to get to the shoot. I wouldn't be able to get to where they were doing things. And so the bigger issue is actually getting there. And when you're the first person of your type in these spaces, you're going to have to navigate those challenges for the first time with everyone else that works there. So it's awkward, it's cumbersome, it's clumsy, but it's necessary. And all it
Yeah.
means is that the next person has an easier way to get there and an easier way to get their foot in the door. So perfection is not what we're looking for, or even remotely what we're aiming for. We're just looking for effort.
It's I'll ask you a question, hopefully not putting you on the spot, but who breaks the ice in a situation like that? Were you the one to say like, hey, I'm as capable in the store to put clothes back on the rack or check someone out at the register? Were you the one who broke the ice? Because I found it not somewhat humorous, but you're right on the kids side is they kind of lack no filter. So who broke the ice?
To circle back on what we were talking about earlier, I mentioned that sometimes you in the vulnerable spot have to take that first step to put yourself in a more vulnerable spot to show people that you can do things. And
Yeah,
that's what it's like most of the time. Like they'll watch and they'll look at you and kind of wait for you to do something. And eventually you'll do it and they'll see, okay, cool, we can ask him to do that now. And it took, I think, 4 months for me to be comfortable in every space. And I wasn't physically comfortable in every space. And emotionally, it was taxing and it did suck. And there was a lot of times that were really hard because of things that I was going through just to do with disability. But it's important that those negative emotions never tap into the people who are trying to help. And that's where that stereotype of the agitated person with a disability comes from, because it is agitating. It's agitating
yeah,
as all hell. Like my anxiety, my frustration, my stress shows at like a 4, where let's say a normal person's at a 1 or a 0, because I have to move around in this 2 by 2 foot box, nailing everything. I can't go upstairs. Everything's difficult. I'm below everything. So that stereotype's true. It's very much easy to be agitated and to let that seep into the people that are around you. So it's super, super, super important, at least to me, that that never happens to the best of my abilities, because they're just trying to help. And the problem is, if you lash out from a place of vulnerability, chances are those people will let you get away with it. And as much as it sucks, and I understand why that happens, we as people with disabilities, especially me, have to keep myself in check to make sure that that doesn't happen. So it's a question of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Do you say something or do they give you the task? And usually you got to say something and you just got to show initiative, and then the rest follows.
yeah. I mean, there's a theme that I'm hearing from you throughout our conversation today, which is you put yourself in a vulnerable spot. The CMO, the head of studio, the art director, the photographer, folks within business that are helping to support an inclusive mission for the brand to be able to reach all of their potential consumers. They're advocates. You're as big of a champion for a brand as someone else.
Yeah.
It comes. You put yourself in the vulnerable spot. I think the leaders within the business need to accept that. Need to put themselves in that vulnerable spot of having the conversation, which was the other piece that you've kind of consistently come back to is you felt vulnerable or put yourself in a vulnerable spot, you had that conversation. You've
Yeah.
worked with brands to have that conversation. The kids, you almost want to tell the teacher, like, let John speak. We want to hear what he has to say. So that's really powerful for me because for leaders, a lot of leaders have big egos. You got to be able to just bite through being that invincible leader for a second and to just like anything, in order to learn, you need to break down those walls and fences.
Yeah.
Um, so tell me a little bit about the success that you've been able to drive. I think you started out, some of the introduction yourself about the success that you create, but I'm curious, a couple recent times where you've been able to see success from the efforts you put in.
So the first would be the Paralympic line. Very obvious, very tangible success. We can see iterations of building a product and developing and watching it come to fruition. That's a great thing. And then in physical spaces, in terms of physical activity, so I do sports, I do public speaking at sporting events, fitness events, to as like a motivational speaker, and seeing that is very ethereal. You get to feel people's energies and frequencies being raised with conversation, with the right type of conversation, and I really enjoy that as well. And the successes in companies is, you can, when we have these things, these roadblocks along the way, and the people you're working with, you can see it in their eyes when they have the realization that you're making it through different problems, and they're learning, and then you can see them rewire their thoughts and their preconceptions of what this means to help somebody with a disability or to work with someone with a disability. And that
Yeah.
is, it's quite rewarding. It's almost more rewarding than the tangible things because you get to see them change for the better and have more understanding and work with them and understand how to work with the next person. So, of all the things that I enjoy to see as results of my work, I think the one on one aspect where we're learning from each other is the most rewarding.
Yeah. One of the challenges, to kind of go back to just an earlier thought, but I think, one of the challenges out there in the inclusion and accessibility space that brands are, more and more brands have a diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility mission statement on their website, right? And not every way that the brand can evaluate their next website visitor, their next store visitor in person is visible, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of discussion in the space around, the aging population, and there's visual impairments, there's hearing impairments, there's also people that are born with no vision, or no hearing. There's cognitive disabilities. So it's, I think being able to look at inclusion and accessibility from not just what you can see on a person, or understand that, how they interpret something from an audio perspective. You need to go at it with an open mind.
Yeah.
As
To add,
we Yeah, go
sorry, to
ahead.
add to that real quick, there's 30 million something people in Canada, right around there. And 1 in 5 people in here have a disability. So we're talking 6 million people. The elderly population, all the boomers that are growing up, a lot of them are having disabilities now as they get older, hearing, seeing, sight, visual impairments. In the States, let's say we have
Yeah.
300 million. I think it's right around there, maybe 320. That's 61 million people that have a disability that you can affect. And if you get in there first, that's 61 new customers that are coming to you. So
Yeah. And
there's
that's
power
you
in
just
that.
said something that's so funny, because it's like brands, and I'm sure to a very calculated move from Lululemon, the audience, the buyer, the advocate for their brand was right at the doorstep, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm sure, and I know you live locally to them, but it wasn't your first time learning about Lululemon when you got a call or you saw a posting or whatnot to help them launch this line. So that buyer, that advocate for the brand is right there.
And to me, I think numbers based. And it was hard for me to see the value in putting all this money into building accessibility things for people because I thought it was such a small group. I was like, there's no way it's profitable to put money into this because you're
Mm,
building this for what, a couple 100,000 people? Because I was just thinking about people like me. But guess what? There's a lot more than people like me that includes having a disability. So it turns out it's not just profitable, it grows the brand in different areas that wouldn't have been there because guess what? There's 32 million people, but if you have grandparents, if you have parents, if you have younger, everyone knows somebody with a disability that they can buy a gift for if they know
yeah.
that your company has it. So there's
And you
huge
wear
value.
athletic shorts, I'm
Yeah.
sure. You're wearing an athletic tee when you're playing basketball. So, you know, it's a relatable component there. So I want to wrap up with just your take on some of the biggest disruptions coming in the accessibility space.
I think right now it's a race to get there first and do it right first. Because once we break that wall, that seal of it being norm, and not just norm to have inclusivity, diversity, equity, and action in your mission statement idea, we all have that, but the next step is going to be actually implementing that in our websites and in our product. And once we get there, who does it first, who does it fastest, and who does it best is going to own the market. So
Yeah,
if you want to be a disruptor for that, invest now, invest quick, and make the product proper. Because from what I know, there's a few products that have accessibility built into it, but not a lot of them are very nice or put together too well, or stuff that I would wear because it's just as someone who likes fashion and likes to look good, not a lot of it looks good. and not a lot of the products are
Yeah.
really that well designed. So if you want to be disruptor, get in there and stick your company in there and make something of it, because there's space and there's a lot to be caught in there.
Very good, Roman. We're getting towards the tail end of our conversation today. I wanted to kind of open the forum up for anything else you want to share or touch on that we may not have gotten to today.
Yeah, to highlight, I think will just be conversations. If you want to learn more about this, if you want to bring in someone to communicate to your school, to your brand, to your company, whatever it might be, find someone in your community, talk to them, bring them forward, ask them if they're comfortable being vulnerable, and have that conversation. It might be difficult for both sides because they have to be vulnerable and you have to admit you don't know everything, which is hard. But once you get there and you have that common ground, beautiful things can happen. And that's what I get to see firsthand all the time. And that's what I encourage everyone else to try and get a taste for. Because once you do, you'll love it. So the only thing to take away from this is have conversations and be open minded. That'll take you as far as you need to go.
Okay. Thank you again, Roman. Really enjoyed having you on our conversation each week, and hope that we can do this again because every time I speak with you, I learn more. So thank you again, Roman.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it.